Okay, welcome back. It's Monday, April 21st after Easter weekend. Hope you guys had a good weekend. Anybody cook anything this weekend? What'd you cook? Okay. I was going to say you did dessert, right? Of some sort, right? Anybody else cook anything? All right. Yeah, so let's jump in. So we are now 61%. So we'll be 70% or 67% of the way through the semester. In 2 weeks, we'll be 75% of the way through the semester. So just again, a reminder to keep your eye on the prize. And we only have a limited amount of time remaining to get our grades up to passing. Again, still want to urge you guys um, to be cognizant of your grade in the class and how it's impacting your peers. Right now, as of Friday, um, in period one, we've got three people that really, they strike pretty seriously at their grades. Two in the 50s and two in the 30s, three in the 30s, and one person in the 20s. So I just want to urge you to keep your eye on the prize. You gotta demonstrate the learning in order to get the grade, right? And so, and then in second period, coming in as the number one leading, if we have two people get to passing, they will get the pizza party. And again, the pizza party is open to any class, not one class. And then in third period baking, we've got three students in the 40s and one in the 20s. So hopefully, if we can re-engage. I know that in first period, I've got three students that I am your only failing grade, and so that tells me that you have the capability to do well academically, and maybe it's just a choice to focus on other classes. But I just want to urge you to keep your eye on that, and let's get our grades up. So through demonstrating the learning, so that we can be successful and get the grade that we want by the end of the semester. Learning target for this week: I and we will learn and apply basic yeast bread preparation and baking skills. So again, I and we will learn and apply basic yeast bread preparation and baking skills. Okay, so we're doing yeast bread this week. We're preparing focaccia bread. Okay, who's had focaccia bread? Okay, yummy. Sort of, uh, some would call it a pan fried bread because you put a bunch of olive oil in the pan and then you bake it. But it's oily. It's fluffy in the center, crispy on the outside. Herbs, garlic to finish it. Nice Italian sort of, not really a flatbread, but somewhere in between a loaf of bread and a flatbread in terms of elevation. We're doing unit 11 and 12. So reminder, complete the units, add both screenshots, and add the scores together to submit that. Okay. What do we see in these images, right? Rustic style bread. This one looks very rustic here. A lot of the rustic style breads are coming back now. If you go to like Alan Ernie's or you go to different classical type bakeries here in the Vancouver and Battleground area, you're going to find this really coming back. Blue Door Bakery, or maybe if you go to like La Provence, you can find some really higher quality bread. But really, this has hit sort of a mainstream. I mean, you can go to Safeway. Most of those breads are produced right outside of that store, and they're frozen and then distributed and then thawed when they're put on the shelf. And so, but good color, good garniture, different types of flavor profiles, all of that represented. When we talk about baking and ingredients, there's some primary functional ingredients that you want to consider. So yeast is there to obviously give us rise, right? But it also gives us a reaction, right? A chemical reaction when the yeast, when moisture and heat are added to it, it creates bubbles, it ferments, right? And as a result of that, you get rise, and so you get the rise of the bread. It feeds off of the sugar in the recipe or the sweetener in the recipe, and it's going to give us unique taste, especially if you get into using like a sourdough starter or something like that, that you started naturally. Okay, that's a natural way to leaven bread, but it all has the byproduct of producing carbon dioxide. Okay, and the dioxide is what produces the elevation. Flour obviously is giving us structure. It's giving us gluten. The more it's worked, the more structure it gives. And then the other thing is it helps trap the bubbles that are produced through the carbon dioxide production, or in the case of like quick breads, like the griddle cakes we made, the production of, or the addition of baking soda baking powder combination again produces that carbon dioxide or rise in a quick methodology. But again, the flour is there to produce structure around it so that it traps those bubbles and rises. Then you get into liquids, right? And they're primarily, thank you. They're primarily there to dissolve the dry ingredients to make them more homogeneous in nature, and obviously to add some moisture to the baked item. Eggs are going to give us protein basis and structure. Sweeteners are going to give us some color, right? Darker breads, like if you looked at a challah or something like that, maybe over a Passover, you've seen challah out there in the stores, a more enriched dough because of the egg yolks in it, but also because of additional sugar in the recipe, it adds to the browning of the dough. And then salt, it slows and actually can kill the yeast, or the term in the baking terminology is retarded to stop the yeast from being able to produce. So you add the salt a little bit later in the production process as you're mixing the ingredients. And the primary function of the salt is just to enhance flavor in the item that you're preparing. Okay, and then the last item, fat, is there as a shortener. Okay, so it cuts in between those proteins and those fat molecules in the recipe, and serves to tenderize. Okay, so you're going to find more eggs. Egg-based recipes, you're going to find a ratio of fat in there to help tenderize it. But in this case, the functionality of fat, you're going to find the ratio to be higher, like in quick breads, okay, that have more eggs in them, and lower in yeast breads. Unless it's like a challah or something like that, you'll find additional fat in it. Okay, and the methodology, okay, for yeast bread, this is what you're going to follow this week. And we have to do what's called a slow fermentation because of our limited time in class. And so what you'll do is you'll mise en place your dough tomorrow, your ingredients. We'll combine them and make the dough and knead it on Thursday, and put it into your pans. And then Friday, what'll happen, or Thursday, what'll happen is you'll come in and I will have already pulled your dough out of the refrigerator. I will have put it into the proofing box that's in the back there, okay? And that gives us a humidity-based environment that's warm, okay? You're looking for about 110 degrees in the proofing box, 110, 120 degrees in the proofing box, and it's going to then rise your dough. So by the time you get here to class Thursday morning, I'll come in early, and you will put your bread right into the oven. Okay, we'll get the necessary rise. I'll come in about an hour and a half before you get here, get that rise to happen. But it will be also the night before slowly fermenting much slower in the refrigerator. If it's refrigerated, it just slows down the gases being produced. And once we bring it out to room temperature, we'll get the rise that we want. So you'll basically combine the ingredients, you'll mix them, you'll let it rest, you'll knead it, develop the gluten, okay, giving it structure. You'll again proof it, the first proofing, letting it rise. Then you're going to shape it into a roll or a pretzel or whatever it might be. Then you're going to proof it again. You're going to bake it, cool it, and consume it. Okay, so that's the step-by-step process. There's basically 12 primary steps in the process of baking a yeast bread. And really the chemistry behind it lies back into those slides that I just showed you. It's about that balance of the protein and the fat, and the flavor agents and the leavening agent, the yeast, in order to get the desired outcome that we want. Okay, I'm going to show you a quick video here on the short production of yeast bread. Okay, and then we're going to go over what we're going to do tomorrow for the focaccia, and then I'm going to release you to work on units 11 and 12 in Ruby. So here we go.
You weigh everything out so it's accurate. Then we're going to take our warm, slightly warm water Today I'm going to demonstrate the 12 steps to yeast dough production. The first step is to scale out your ingredients, so you weigh everything out so it's accurate. Then we're going to take our slightly warm water.
And my recommendation, if you got serious about baking, you want to scale everything. You want to go to grams and don't use ounces and pounds anymore. Go to grams and use them across the board for liquid or dry ingredients. You're going to increase your accuracy significantly by making that conversion.
And our active dry yeast in this case, and we're going to put it in the water. And you want to let your yeast sit in the warm water for 2-3 minutes just to kind of dissolve a little bit. It won't completely dissolve, it'll get a little lumpy, but just so that it will soften. While you're doing that, we're going to put it on the mixer. Make sure your mixing bowl is completely on your mixer. And then we're going to use the dough hook attachment. And this will replicate kneading the dough. So once you've given your yeast a little bit of time to absorb some water, you're going to take your flour, and this is 22 ounces of bread flour. We're going to use almost all of it. We'll leave a little bit out. This is the straight dough mixing method. So the second step is mixing it. So we'll leave a little bit on the side just in case we don't need it all. And then you add your salt. You always want to put your flour in before you add your salt because salt is very important in yeast dough production. It controls the growth of the yeast and gives it flavor and helps develop gluten. But if the yeast comes in direct contact with the salt, it will kill the yeast. So turn it on low. Once it starts to come together, turn it up a little bit. And you can see most of the flour has been picked up. At this point, I'm going to scrape down the bowl. And feel it. Maybe add just a tiny bit more flour, but not all of it. And then turn it back on low. Of course, when you add flour, don't add it on high. Once all the flour has been picked up, we can turn it up a little bit. And now we're going to start kneading the dough. We want to knead our dough until it's nice and smooth and elastic. At this point, you could let the dough rest for 5 minutes and let all the gluten absorb water, and then come back and just finish it in a minute or two, or you can continue on to knead it from start to finish. That time where we let the gluten absorb the water shortens the kneading time, and especially if you're kneading by hand, that is a good thing because it takes a lot of energy to knead by hand. So you can see how the dough is looking different than it was, but it's still a little lumpy, it's still a little broken up, so it has to go a little bit further. Thinking it needs a little bit more flour. So if you look at the dough now, it's smoothing out, it's getting a stretchiness from the gluten development. So maybe one more minute.
Hi, good morning.
Our dough is done pretty much. Take the dough hook off. And if you look at the dough itself, you can see it's smooth and elastic, has a good stretch to it. One way you can test to see if it's kneaded enough is you take a little piece off and then roll it in your hands. And if it gets smoother and stretchier, then it needs more kneading. And if it starts to kind of fall apart like this is, then it's done. So from here, I'm going to put a little tiny bit of oil in the bowl, and then I'm going to cover it, wrap a little bit of oil on top of the dough, and then I'm going to cover it with a towel. And now it's time for it to do the bulk fermentation. Bulk fermentation is where it doubles in size. This is the period of time where you develop most of the flavor for the bread. So very important. The longer your bulk fermentation, the better your bread will taste. So we'll be back in a couple hours.
So
Our dough is,
in our case, right, we're going to go slower and in the refrigerator and get slower fermentation. So normally you would put it into a proofing box or put it somewhere warm, covered with saran wrap in a bowl and let it proof.
had time to rest and bulk ferment. It is now ready to move on to our folding or punching stage. And this is where once it's doubled inside, you press the air out. From here, the next step is to scale out portions. And this particular recipe makes approximately 12 French rolls. So what I do is I divide it, create a log, divide the log in two, and then into 4 pieces. And then each piece I divide into 3. While you're working on the dough, you want to try to keep it covered. And you want to start with the ones that you did first. Gluten needs to relax, or it will stretch and just kind of spring back to the shape that it was to start with. So what I want to show you now is how to round. And the way we round is by pressing the dough against the table and then pulling it back to create a seam on the bottom. So again, you take your dough, cupping your hand, using your fingers to tuck the dough under and creating that seam. Push and then pull back, tucking with your fingers. Once you start to get used to doing this, you start to do it with 2 hands. And the idea is you're creating surface tension so you get a nice smooth roll. So I'm not rolling like that. I'm actually pressing the dough and stretching it. At this point, you need to let the dough rest again for 15 to 20 minutes. This is called benching. And since we're not actually making any other shape besides nice round rolls, what I'm going to do instead is take them and place them directly onto my pan. I'm going to space them evenly. Again, we cover them to keep them from drying out and forming an elephant skin. And from here, we're going to double in size again during our proofing stage. If these were a richer dough, you wouldn't want to, at this point, if you proof them till they're double, they would collapse in the oven. But this is a real lean dough. You saw we had no fat in it at all. So we're going to let them double in size. Again, it should take about an hour and a half, 2 hours. Our rolls have had a chance to double in size. When you press on them, they don't spring back. What you want to do is take a sharp knife and just score the tops gently. It gives a place for the steam to escape. And then I have an oven, 450 degrees for a lean dough with a pan of a little bit of water in the bottom. So I open up the oven and I put the rolls in. And then I take water and I create some steam and I close the door. This will give your rolls a golden color and help create a crusty French bread. Without the steam, they just don't get as much color and they don't get as crusty. The rolls have been in the oven about 20 minutes. They should be done.
You'll find typically in most commercial bakeries, they'll have a steam injected deck oven, and so the oven itself disperses steam into the baking process. So putting a pan in it, you do it in a more conventional oven like this or at home.
Let's see. Nice and golden colored. You pick one up and thump the bottom and it should sound hollow. And they're ready. The next step to yeast dough production is you want to let them cool, move them onto a rack so there's air circulating. If you leave them on the pan, moisture can build up and then go soggy. So you want to move them to a rack and let them cool off. And once they're completely cool, you can wrap them up to store them or, of course, serve fresh.
So that's the 12-step process for baking a yeast bread. Ours is going to be a more condensed version of that. So I'm going to show you just a really quick video of how to prepare focaccia bread. You'll be mixing, mise en placing your dry ingredients tomorrow. Lukewarm water is about 110 degrees. You don't want to use a whisk in this process. Use a rubber spout or even a wooden spoon is fine. A whisk is too messy because it gets inside the whisk tines. It's hard to get out. The dimpling is really a classical part of making focaccia bread and a nice proof. You see that extra oil in the bottom of the pan and on top. That's that whole sort of frying methodology. It's going to get nice and crispy on the outside because of that excess oil. You want to have some of those bubbles. That's fine after you do the dimpling. Then coat your salt, some nice fresh herbs, some red pepper flakes. Add some heat to it. Put a generous amount of maldon and kosher salt on top. Maldon is just a nice crystallized sea salt, a little bit larger in size. Be right back. So that nice saltiness on top.
There's one more left. What? What? We've done 4 so far.
Let it cool, crispy on the outside. Lift it up and show you sort of the bubbly texture on the inside. That's what we're looking for. That's it. So that's what we're making this week. Okay. So as I said, we're doing Ruby 11 and 12 right here. And you got the rest of the class period to work on that. And then the other thing is I want you to log into Google Classroom and check your grade, right? I'll, as always, update grades later on today in Skyward once a week. I do that. So I'll do that update in Skyward this afternoon. And let's lean into Ruby. Okay. And I'll put a timer on the screen. Thanks, you guys.